welcome to Mystical Hot Topics. I am your main host, Mystically, and I am joined again this week by Jared, all the way from Hawaii. Hey, Jared.
Hey,
I'm going to share out the video.
so
Yeah. So, you guys are talking about solar flares today, and I'm gonna let Jared just kind of go off on explaining and talking to them, so that way, because I know he's got a lot to say. So, go ahead and start, Jared. First of,
so I
what
got
is a solar flare? To start off with, what is a
oh,
solar flare?
it's like well, the theory is that the sun is a ball of plasma and it's burning at the center of it. What's that called? Solar fusion all the time. So on occasion, just like the Earth has volcanic eruptions on occasion, it has a sort of eruption that spews out into the solar system in a random direction, and the sun's huge, so most of the time it's going in a direction other than Earth facing, and even when it hits the Earth, if it happens to go in our direction, it's usually not a problem. But I'll go into why it's becoming a problem in a bit. Was there anything else you wanted to ask before I get started?
And before we get started, just for those who chimed in, and I'll probably post this a few times through the video, is I just have a 20-second slideshow just so people can kind of get a visual of what it is we're talking about. So I'm going to go
Okay.
ahead and show that real quick. So here's the solar flare, right? And then this is what it looks like when it shoots out of the sun. And then this is the picture of the most recent one coming our direction. I don't know if you guys are able to hear me when the slideshow is going, but I was kind of trying to explain the different images, and the very last image on there is the most recent solar flare that's currently heading our direction. That I think is supposed to be here tomorrow. Have you heard much about the solar flare that's coming tomorrow? Because from what I was reading, it sounds like a lot of people were cautioning people on electronics going out because of the solar flares. So expecting train delays, expecting like your computer to be glitchy. It was just kind of, from what I was reading, different opinions kind of vary, but the most conservative mainstream ideology seemed to be like, hey, expect your trains to be delayed on Monday and Tuesday. Expect for some computer glitches or electronic systems to kind of be flaky.
Well, I've been following this topic for over a decade, and I've seen a lot of this sort of thing before. They're really really bad at forecasting this sort of thing and how it's going to impact us. And I think sometimes they use it as an excuse. If somebody plans on attacking the internet, the banking system or something wants to do a change, and it's going to affect the whole internet or the whole credit card system, and it'll be down or disrupted. Sometimes they might blame it on solar flares. I think I can't prove that though. But basically, this is as good a place to start as any. These flares happen on a regular 11-year cycle, and at a certain point in that cycle, it gets really intense. We might be there right now. I should have done a little homework on that before I started this. I don't know where we are on the cycle at the moment, but it doesn't really matter, because what's going on is there's a much larger cycle of 12,000 years that has to do with the Earth's protective shield, electromagnetic shield, just like in Star Trek, starships have an electromagnetic shield that protects them from energy attacks. It's the exact same thing, literally, in our world with the planet. There's a naturally occurring magnetic field the planet puts up, but it gets weak when you go into a pole shift, which we're in already right now. The poles are already moving. So there are areas where the shield is basically down to 10% now, and there's other areas where it's already down to like 60%. It's going to go all the way to 0% in our lifetime. And well, some people say it won't. Some people say it'll take longer, but everything I've read indicates that that's disinformation. There's a lot of disinformation out there about this topic. I've been researching it over 10 years, and there's still some points about it I'm not super clear on, just because there's definitely someone has an agenda to to muddy the waters on this topic for some reason. So,
So
but I,
if someone's trying
but
to ask more questions about the topic, have you found any specific sources that are a little bit more reliable than other sources
hard,
when it comes to this?
it's hard to know because people will tell you that you can't believe what NASA and the official sources have to say on this topic, and I think they might be right. I got onto this a long time ago. I was on conspiracy sites about UFOs because that was a topic that UFOs and aliens used to really interest me. It doesn't really anymore, but it used to immensely interest me because of my own background and things I've seen and experienced that I can't explain. And on those sites, when we got closer to 2012, the whole Mayan calendar thing was real popular then, and they started talking about the possibility of the sun kicking off something, and that's how I started to learn about this. Although even when I was a child, one time at synagogue when I was about 11 years old, someone mentioned this whole thing to me, which is really weird, but it kind of primed me so that when this would come up again, I'd pay attention, and that's why I know about all of this. Um, so I was saying, what's going on right now is the magnetic field is very weak. Ordinarily, the strongest kind of solar flare it would take to disrupt the electronics on Earth at all, and that kind of thing happened during the Carrington event in the 1800s, and I guess that was about 150 years ago or something like that. Off
Yeah,
the
it was
top
like
of my
in the
head,
1800s. I have it actually when I was researching it. That was a hot topic that came up. It was in 1859, and it
right?
disrupts all the electronic equipments, all the ways for people to talk to each
Telegraph.
other, and yeah, the telegraph. Uh,
Telegraph was the big electronic system back then. There wasn't much else, and it completely disrupted it. But that wasn't a big deal back then. It was about 150 years ago. That's when the Earth's magnetic shield was at 100%, but we got a direct hit with a very strong solar flare, or yeah, I think it was a solar flare, not a coronal mass ejection. That's a different thing, but they're related. So anyway, if we even got a weak direct hit right now, it could potentially knock out not just the internet, not just all the cell phones, but the entire electronic grid of at least half the planet, if not the whole planet at once. And if it doesn't get the whole planet at once, the the field of the Earth will be down long enough. It might hit us a direct hit again and get the other side of the planet. We just don't know.
yeah.
Odds are
Well, I think
that they will
recently I
be.
read that Japan got hit by one recently, and it caused a blackout in certain parts of Japan. So these
I
are
don't.
flares that have been hitting us, but they haven't been hitting large enough areas, I guess, for people to talk about, or maybe
No, no.
like,
I wouldn't trust that information. If we get hit, it'll be a whole half of the planet at once, or the whole planet at once. It won't just impact one country. If someone's saying a solar flare hit us and it just impacted one country or a section of a country, that's obviously disinformation. Because the way this thing
okay,
works, the sun's so big, if it hits us at all, it hits half the planet at once.
okay. So
If
because
I had
what I was
if I was
reading
with you
is it
in
was
person, I could model this.
what I was seeing was, I guess, certain parts in Canada have experienced this before. Japan recently had a blackout from this. So what you're saying is when I'm reading those articles that are talking about these parts in other countries going off grid, that it's probably something else causing it to go off grid, and what they're giving the
Yeah,
public is that it's solar flares. So
yeah.
it almost
Enough
sounds like the
people are
government.
aware. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, it almost sounds like the government is using solar flares in a way that the USSR was known for using UFO and alien discussion. That it's a topic that's taboo to talk about, but we're going to talk about it when something happens, and we don't want you asking about the political questions. We want you to ask about the conspiracy questions. And then that's all of a sudden when those topics become popular again for the masses to talk about, is when they want control of the narrative, when it's not really a solar flare. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah, I think it's our modern day swamp gas. It's like swamp gas actually did exist, but it never actually did what they were claiming it was doing with the UFOs sightings and whatever. It's kind of like that. Enough people are aware of the Carrington event and the potential impacts of solar flares and coronal mass ejections that uh, whenever anything weird happens with electronics, a lot of people's brains go there. But the sun is just it's a million times bigger than the Earth. It's so big, its effects are so huge. Well, anytime there's any shift in the way the sun's behaving, it immediately changes all the weather on Earth. And
Right.
that's what all the climatology models are based on, if that gives you any indication. And that goes off into another tangent that I don't want to go into here, but there's a lot of other stuff that I have even less information about than solar flares that's potentially happening in space that affect our solar system. That may be a big cover up, but that's not the topic today. I did
Well,
mention
yeah, and
before
that's
we got
harder to validate, right? Because how many people have
harder,
telescopes
yeah,
where they can
mu-
access to
much
gather their
harder to
own
validate.
information?
It goes beyond telescopes even, and yeah, it's very hard to validate any of that stuff, and there's all kinds of rumors, and they've been around a long time, and there does seem to be an indication to try to snuff that information out and take it off the internet, so there might be something to it. But solar flares is something that's more concrete. It's been a topic that's been talked about a long time, and there's a lot of information on it. One YouTube channel that does a really good job covering this, and anyone who's clicked on this might already know about them, is Suspicious Observers. They have a documentary, it's, I think, around an hour long. It covers all the evidence of the Earth's magnetic shield getting weaker, which has been completely confirmed at this point by official sources, and how even a weak solar flare direct hit could potentially knock out the whole grid of the planet. It's a great documentary. It's scary. It's bone-chilling stuff, though. Also tangential to this is the idea that since the poles definitely are shifting, that could mean that we might be headed into an ice age, or at least a mini ice age now, which would explain the crop failures that have been happening all over the world. And I also want to separate that topic out, though, from the
Yeah,
topic of
because
forced
from what I've
destruction.
heard with a lot of the crop failures, it's also a lot of the greenhouse politics going in and asking and demanding these farmers switch fertilizer overnight, which is also killing the earth as
Yeah,
well.
that's what I was gonna say. Before all of that started to get implemented in the last year, the forced destruction of the food supply, this was already happening. There was a guy that's had a YouTube channel for several years going back who started to pick up on this 20 years ago when he was working in the corporate world, as a guy that was sourcing coffee, I believe, and he was talking to some natives somewhere, and the natives were explaining the cycles of the planet that they know from antiquity, and how the planet's going into a cycle of getting colder now, and that's why the crops aren't doing as well, because they started noticing this 20 years ago and telling him about it. And so that's what tipped him off. His YouTube channel is Adapt 2030. If you check out Adapt 2030 and Ice Age Farmer and Suspicious Observers on YouTube, that should lead you to all the other channels that talk about these topics. I
Oh, I
think,
want to stop you for a moment because you said something really interesting to me. I think a lot of people that this is a new topic will be confused about. You said that the Earth is cooling. We keep hearing that we are facing global warming, that the Earth is warmer, and that like this summer is so hot. That's why more people are dying from heat-caused blood clots and heart issues is because of these heat waves. Because the summer's just been so much hotter, supposedly. Can you explain, is that because of the solar flares, or is that how does that fit into global warming?
it's very interesting what's going on in North America, how it's so hot this summer. Here in Hawaii, it practically feels like January, and we're in the middle of July. And
Oh
I think
wow.
that absolutely has to do with the pole shift, because the poles have moved down. The North Pole has moved down into Siberia. So Hawaii's actually closer now to a pole than it was a couple years ago, and our weather is reflecting that. So um, in a sort of way, I'm sure it is related to solar flares, but I think it's more related to the pole shift. All these topics are connected. It gets. I'm not sure which direction to go with next, but I don't think it's solar flares making your weather hotter, but it could be exacerbating if you're getting if you're getting hit by solar flares that are weak ones on top of the magnetic shield already being weaker, if it's hitting North America right now directly, that might be heating it up even more. It could also be a potential Black Ops space weapon being unleashed on North America. I mean, a lot of people speculate that the wildfires that have occurred, specifically in California and all over the world, were space weapons. There's a lot of evidence that that's the case.
And so would something like that, sort of a space weapon, could that be used as people saying solar flares could be a cover up for those type of weapons? Have you seen that at all
Yeah.
when you're researching the topic of solar flares, or what kind of excuse have they used for that?
I suspect, I can't pin anything down. I suspect that that's the case.
Yeah. Because people don't seem to be asking too many questions about some of these freaky weather phenomenon that, I mean, we didn't grow up experiencing. And I know another excuse that people tend to give as to why all of a sudden all these major weather events we aren't used to hearing about, we're hearing about, is not necessarily that they're new, is because we have access to the internet. So there's more information being gathered. Do you think it could be a combination of both, or do you really, or is it that we're ignoring the science?
I'm on a live stream.
Oh.
The science on what now?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. Oh wait, now I forgot the question.
Yeah,
I was talking about with the weapons. Like, is it, so when we talk about that there's more of these events happening, like more of these forest fires, more of like, you know, in China, they've got the red rivers and their bamboo blossoming. A lot of people say we're just hearing more about these stories because not because they're happening more often or they're happening, you know, for the first time in generations, but because this is the first time we all have access to the internet and hands to share it. And so what is your opinion about that? You think it's a little bit of both, or that we're ignoring some of the science?
No, I think it is that our attention's been drawn there. I think if you look at the farmers' almanacs and some of the Fortean magazines in the past, you'll find that these freak occurrences have always been going on. It's just people are more hypersensitive, primed to it now because there's been over a generation of this rhetoric about climate change now, which they were calling global warming. Oh, and let me also say something about that. Like, you're experiencing hotter weather, which is what they were telling us for a long time was going to happen. Then they switched it to global warming. Why? Because there's places like here where we're experiencing colder weather. And you know, while I'm mentioning that, David Wilcock had a presentation, not that I trust him a whole lot, but he had a presentation years ago about how the entire solar system, every planet in the solar system is experiencing heating. So if there is global warming, then it's not global, it's solar system.
So that would probably indicate that there's more going on with like solar flares then, right? If it's not just Earth, but the entire solar system.
It could be something else. There are people that say that something's been shot out at us from Sagittarius A, and then there's other people that were saying a long time ago, by the way, 30, 40 years ago, that we were entering a more highly energized pocket of the galaxy, and when we did, it was going to cause all kinds of changes on Earth. We're certainly experiencing all kinds of changes on Earth, both physiologically, mentally, and in the environment.
Right. It's crazy
I know
how
this is all over the place.
When most people wake up and they see the sun, all they think about is just night and day, summer, you know, fall, winter, spring, and then that's kind of it, right? We're not really taught that there's more going on with the sun than that, and when it comes to a basic education, but it is such a huge part of our day-to-day life. Beyond just, you know, it being day and night.
Our basic education. Our basic public education just teaches us enough for us to be somewhat highly functional workers in a giant system. It doesn't teach us anything about the cycles that even the ancient Greeks knew about 3,000 years ago. There's so many cycles when it comes to not just history, but nature itself. I mean, it affects history because we're in nature ourselves.
Hmm.
By the way, these topics were being covered by Joe Rogan quite a bit about 10 years ago, and he since went off in a more, first he went into a pop culture direction, I feel like, and then he went in, now he's in a political direction. But around 2012, he had, I think it was a Mason, like a master Mason guy on that was talking about the cycles and the pole shifts and the potential ice age and the potential reset of history and the potential of solar flares. All of this was, I forget who the guy was. It's been 10 years ago since I watched this episode, but there was an in-depth discussion about all this on Joe Rogan a long time ago.
Wow. It's awesome how many things that when you go back in Joe Rogan's history, just all the different topics that he covers, right? I think that's probably why he's so popular now and why he's so feared, right? By the mass media and by a lot of like what we could call mainstream culture, right? Because even though maybe part of him going through that regression of pop culture is what opened the door for him to be seen as more credible in some of these more controversial topics to, you know, to people who aren't as willing to listen. It's just,
Well,
it's crazy how much credibility he now has with people on topics that people would never have listened to.
I think something's happened with our culture in general in the last 5 years that's everything's become politicized. Everything's been pulled in the direction of politics, and that impacted Joe as much as anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, I still haven't quite figured out how they managed that, because if you go back to 10 years ago, people were on a completely different page. People were interested in like what's going on with UFOs and aliens and what's going on, yeah, with solar flares or anything that could potentially lead to the end of the world. All of a sudden now we're like way back in this old left right fighting to the death paradigm.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like the intelligence agencies have put in everything they had to get us derailed from reaching a higher global state of consciousness. And we're in this battle right now between ascending into a sort of global unity where the whole world starts to work together effectively and we stop having endless wars, and regression to the mean of human history, which is just endless human wars, endless human suffering, and then people live to be about 30, that kind of thing, endless slavery.
So do you think that seeing that in just such a quick period of 10 years, do you think that kind of gives some evidence to maybe that we're going through some sort of solar storm, that our entire planet, all of human consciousness is being affected in a similar way, especially knowing how much we're sensitive to the moon?
Yeah, I think there's some sort of a galactic event happening that's impacting Earth, but also even more than Earth. And it's raising the consciousness of human beings rapidly, or at least it's causing us to shift from being left brain to right brain. And the impact of that eventually, I think, is going to lead us out of the Kali Yuga into the Golden Age. But what do we mean by that? I think what we mean by that is the reverse of the story in the Bible of the Tower of Babel. I think we go back into a telepathic state of consciousness. And I think other people have disagreed with me on this, but I think if you're in a global telepathic state of consciousness, lies cease to exist. Now, if lies cease to exist, if deception was gone, duplicity was gone overnight, the people in power who are in power as a result of duplicity stand to lose everything, including their heads. So they're terrified by this. They saw it all coming because they had access to more information than the rest of us. And their whole New World Order scheme, which is completely based on electronics, is to try to prevent this from happening. I think that's impossible because I think the sun will eventually take down the electronic grid. And that's their defense system. Without electronics, their whole system collapses and they're not defended anymore. And enough people know now who has been stealing from the rest of us and enslaving the rest of us that if their defense system's gone, that's it. It's game over for them.
A bit like Sri Lanka.
Like Sri Lanka.
Yeah. It's really crazy how much information that these people have that they don't want the rest of us to know about, right? Because then we can't prepare. I was reading some articles earlier about some suggestions on how to protect your electronics from a solar flare. I have it pulled up in one of these tabs, but I remember one of them specifically talking about like wrapping your electronics in aluminum foil, right? And I think aluminum foil is something that a lot of people think of when they talk about being protected from radiation of different forms. And I was wondering, A, can this really help us? And B, if it can help us, wouldn't these systems, these people with all their information, also know that these are certain metals that can protect their electronics from the radiation? Or are they so out of tune with certain information that they overlook information like that?
So I've looked into this a lot because I've been on this topic for so long. I don't think wrapping electronics in aluminum foil would be helpful. I think potentially when this happens, you might see like the cables that carry like telephone cables and the what's it called? The electrical cables. I think they may potentially melt. I think it might be that powerful.
Wow.
So
So
I think the only
if
way
it's
that
that powerful to melt something like those electrical powers, what do you think that's going to do to like our bodies?
well, in 1996, everyone on Earth was hit with like such a strong solar flare that we all got the equivalent of an X-ray. Did you notice it? I didn't notice it
But I didn't notice any of the electronics going out either.
because it was on a different frequency. It wasn't on a frequency that would affect electronics. But that had to do with the Earth's magnetic shield was still at 100% then. Now it's like way down and it's dropping rapidly. So
Do we know what it's at right now? I think I can probably pull it up. It says,
I think it's still at like 60% or something.
is it called the Earth's magnetic field?
Yeah, or shield, whichever. It's hard to find reliable information about where it is at exactly.
Yeah, because they probably, as much as they want to cause like mass hysteria and fear with people, like the stuff that is actually pretty scary and true, it's like they want to shield you. Probably because
So
it's so scary, people might act crazy, and then it's the type of fear that they're afraid of because it can cause chaos as opposed to the fear that causes submission.
I think we're already at that point where everyone's panicking, everyone's losing their minds. But you raised a really good question about what happens to a human being when we get hit with that much cosmic energy at once. Well, the copper and the iron in our bodies is all spaced out. It's not all concentrated. So I think what happens is for a good minute or so, you're going to feel heated up, maybe like feverish. I don't think it's anything worse than that. Obviously, the human race has been through these cycles many times before. We're at least 1 million years old. This happens every 12,000 years. It doesn't kill us.
So I pulled it up. Let's see here. This website is from Forbes. So according to Forbes, depending on how reliable that was, this article came out February of last year, and it said that the magnetic field had been weakened to about 28% of its normal strength. So that's what it was weakened to 72% last year is what Forbes is talking about.
Okay.
So
yeah, that sounds about right.
It's interesting. I've actually, in trying to research this topic, it's interesting how like the New York Post talks about this, Forbes talks about this, and from what I read from them, and it's funny because these articles seem to be kind of hidden. They're not like obviously first page information, but my gut feels like a lot of those facts that they're talking about are legitimate. I also noticed USA Today a couple of days ago released a video, what I thought was a really informative video just on solar flares and how they can mess with your electronics. And I put that on my social media site earlier, just to get some interest in solar flares. So I almost feel like, when it comes to the topic, there's so much false information, but at the same time, there's a movement happening, I feel like, in mass media in general, that some of these news sites that were giving some maybe not so reliable stories are producing a little bit more reliable stories. Again, they're not putting them on the front page, but it's like they're wanting to produce some of the truth now, but they're not ready for us to see it. So they're like hiding it amongst other news so that you just tend to read over it.
I've noticed that too, and I've also noticed a couple government websites now admitting that COVID was completely made up. So
Wow.
I don't know what's causing all of that, but I never quite got to the answer to your question. In order to effectively protect, let's say, a cell phone or a computer, I think you have to put it inside a Faraday cage of 6-inch to 1 foot solid lead metal, completely encasing it to protect it from the worst case scenario, direct hit solar flare on a Earth that has no magnetic shield left. Okay, I think that's the only way. But what would be the point? Because all the electronics on Earth would be melted at that point. So you got a functioning cell phone and computer that you can't plug into anything.
Oh, because you can't get the electricity to power it.
No
Unless your box is
electricity,
big
no
enough.
internet.
I was gonna say, unless your box is big enough to keep your little solar panel, like solar generator, and you put it all in there, and then you're like, guess what? I'm now the only person on the planet who can show you movies.
I guarantee you there are people like Elon Musk that have done that. That they
Yeah.
have all of this stuff in a giant Faraday cage somewhere so that they can be the only person left on Earth that can still access all the modern electronics. I guarantee some billionaires have done that already.
Yeah. So how long do you think if that event were to happen, how long do you think it would be for them to kick it back on if, let's say, Elon Musk and China and some of the other countries have like a few systems saved? How long do you think it would take? Because they would have to rewire everything, right? It's not just
Okay,
about preserving it in the data, but the hardware that goes with it.
so like if you look at the secret teachings, and it's hard to get access to this stuff of what are they called, the secret societies of the world, and piece together what you can from mythology and like the Bible and stuff like that, it's very, a pattern emerges that's very obvious. No matter how intelligent you are, it's a very easy thing to see that the human history is on this catastrophe cycle, they call it. Velikovsky wrote books about this. He did all kinds of math on it and stuff and speculated what was causing it. Every 12,000 years, human civilization completely collapses back to the Stone Age. We're living on an incredibly unstable planet. And it's kind of speaks to how quickly living biological systems regenerate, that every time this happens, everything climbs back out from it, and look how lush and full of foliage the planet is again. I mean, we do have some massive deserts, but by and large, on the land, there's greenery, vegetation everywhere.
Well, even in the deserts, there's so much life even in a lot of the deserts.
So if you look at the arc of recorded human history, it took 3,000 years from the beginning of writing things down until we got, like cities and stuff like that, basically. Or how we think of it today. And then from then until now, that's another 3,000 years. Jesus was 2,000 years ago. The vast majority of, well, that gets into my theory about human population a little bit, but the vast majority of events that have taken place that have led to the modern conveniences we think of, everything we interact with in everyday life today, have happened in the last 150 years of 6,000 years. So to answer your question, I think after this event takes place, it's going to be 3,000 years before, we even get to the point where we rediscover philosophy.
Wow, that's a lot. You'll have like what, those small societies around Elon Musk with his 6 sons. All of a sudden, it's like a huge science guru center that slowly grows.
That's where our secret societies. That's where our secret societies came from.
Yeah,
those people that managed to survive better than everyone else the last cycle. Their descendants became the first Masons and what have you.
right. So this is actually a topic that I had to read about in my anthropology classes, and specifically in environmental anthropology and in environmental archaeology, because like you said, this is a well-documented series of events that happens. And the article that I had to read actually specifically talks about our use of energy and how we evolved to one set of energy, but how we become more destructive as we evolve with energy, to the point we destroy ourselves with energy, right? And the article I was reading, it was much older. It was like, I think, published in the 80s, and it was more in reference to nuclear war. Like we were going to blow ourselves up because we don't fully understand nuclear power, and we were just gonna either kill each other with nuclear bombs or you know, more plants would explode because you have people who don't fully know how to run them, running like faulty tests on them. And it was just talking about how this is a pattern that is humanity, though. We evolve, and then we evolve to the point we self-destruct, and then we
That's
have to go back to basis and then re-evolve again. But every time we re-evolve in a completely different way.
Yeah, that's kind of the idiocracy theory. I don't think that's exactly the mechanism for it. Isaac Asimov wrote a novel that was sort of like a metaphor for this whole process. And in his novel too, it's a natural thing that happens, but in response to the natural thing that happens, our psyches get flipped out, which I think you can already see. In my opinion, the majority of people walking around today are what you would consider insane 20 years ago. Our psyches have already been impacted by something that's happening. And
Do you think it could be, it is just the solar stuff, or do you think it
no,
could be stuff in our food source that's killing off our brain
I was
function?
going to say, I think actually this process has been going on longer than we even realize. It's been going on for decades now. And as we've gone more insane, we've done more and more insane things that just created this negative feedback loop of creating even more insanity in us, to the point where now most of the drinking supplies in the world are full of pharmaceutical drugs that are psychoactive. So when you see insane things everywhere, this is why. You've got electromagnetic fields that impact our brains that are making us insane. You've got chemicals making us insane in the water and in the food, and then there's the toxins everywhere. The environment is crazy toxic compared to what it was 200 years ago. It was pristine 200 years ago, and now it's practically to the point where almost the average person gets cancer by the time they're 40 years old.
Yeah.
So all of these things are making everyone insane, but I think it began in a natural process, and there's a negative reinforcement loop going on.
Okay, and so that negative reinforcement loop probably plays into our ability to manifest and create our reality around us if we're constantly thinking it. So it's like you're getting hit from multiple things. You're getting hit from solar, you're getting hit from food and water, you're getting hit from your, like, arguably your clothes, depending on how you even wash them. And now, again, with that reinforcement with mind thinking, right? Mind and manifesting. So there's all these different things that we're not properly being taught to safeguard ourselves from.
Right.
It's almost crazy that we've lasted this long, right?
And I think the pivotal point here is this impacts the elite too. So they saw this coming, whereas the average person didn't expect any of this. So most of them took precautions to protect themselves against it. But they're to the point where, like with chemtrails and stuff, they're polluting the air themselves. They can't possibly protect themselves from that. I'm sure they're taking things that help remediate that out of their body and detox them all the time. Most of them, some of them toxify themselves on purpose. But the point I'm trying to make is it's impacting their brains too. And I think the thing that started it all was cosmic. And so it's permeating everything, and you can't shield yourself from it. So all of that's impacting them. And I think that's why they think with electronics they can create a new world order and perpetually enslave everybody else, and they'll be on top forever. That's completely nuts thinking. The only constant in the universe, in nature, is change. Change is the nature of time. So there's no way even if they could manage to pull off the new world order, it wouldn't last forever. It would. I don't know how long it would last. I don't think it would last very long. Because I just think it's counter to the whole way that nature's set up. I don't think you can perpetually enslave the majority of a race you belong to in order to benefit off of that. I don't think it works like that. We're all one system. The human race
what
is
we
one
keep seeing
organism.
with history is this constant battle with concepts of slavery and freeing ourselves from slavery.
Yeah, it's a back and forth.
Yeah, and we would say there's definitely, it's back and forth is the perfect way to explain it. Every time they enslave a group, there's, eventually time where they become free, and there's quite the wrath that comes with it. And then and then it goes back and forth between, which side is doing what to which side, except for those moments where both are able to just walk forward and say, bygones be bygones, which, I feel like, at least in our generation, when we were growing up with all the issues that America has in its past, people were more able to like make jokes about it or say bygones be bygones, let's be better. I would even say the word magic, right? And how people responded to the N word in the 90s compared to now and compared to in the past. It's almost like it's more offensive now than it's ever been before, even though,
well, I
but
think
it's
that
another
speaks
form
to
of word magic and how people respond, right? With those waves that you're talking about.
I think that speaks to this feedback loop of insanity that we're stuck in now. And this,
Word
this leads to
insanity.
what?
I said word insanity, how we're
Yeah,
like
yeah.
insane about just the words we produce out of our mouth. Like
Oh
people,
yeah, I know every word's offensive to someone now. This is
there's
just the
no more
collapse of a
sticks and stones will
civilization.
break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Like that
Yeah.
was such a huge mantra that we all grew up saying all the time. And now it's like, now it's not like just the kids are thinking that. Now it's even adults don't
Well,
have that mantra.
there were certain unspoken rules that just everyone knew. Certain laws of human nature, way things were done, like traditional marriage. It's all been thrown out the window. Well, all of those things we knew them because they were in our DNA because over the course of millions of years we evolved to understand this is how things work, and if we don't follow these rules, things fall apart. So we're not following any of those rules now, and civilization's collapsing. Big fucking surprise. I mean,
Yeah.
that's always going to be the result you're going to get because people basically deep down know what's right and what's wrong. But we're in this weird insanity place right now where people are going to be like, no, what's right is wrong and what's wrong is right, and I'm going to do whatever I want to do. That's basically the attitude I see.
Yeah. Hey, Glenda. Hey, Kelly. They're both joining in on the comment section. If you guys are watching in and you have any questions about solar flares or any of these topics we're talking about, please don't hesitate to put it in the comments because this is a live video and we can see your comments. So, and we want to make sure we can answer those questions if you have them. So in my research, when I was looking more into solar flares, there's this topic that came up, CME. Is that something that you're familiar with?
So that's what I was talking about that goes along with the coronal mass ejection. So a solar flare, if I've got this right in my head, is just cosmic waves of energy. But a coronal mass ejection, actually, there's a matter component to it, I think. I really should have done a little bit more homework before I jumped in on this. I just had so many thoughts in my head. I thought I have been able to talk, but basically everyone needs to go.
I need the details, man.
Yeah. Everyone needs to go off of this conversation and do their own research. Like I said earlier, like the waters are very muddied. There's definitely a lot of powerful people out there that don't want people looking into this, don't want people aware of this for whatever reason. And I think it's because they want to implement their control system and they have a whole lot of wishful thinking and they're in the same insanity feedback loop as everyone else at this point. Because like I was saying, the human race is one singular giant organism at the end of the day. That's why we have a collective unconscious. That's why the invisible hand of economics works. That's why people have an idea of God. That's how it's all connected because ultimately we are one ancient organism. You're not 37 years old or 40 years old. You're eternal. However old the first microorganism is, that's how old you are. We're all connected. Life is one giant web. And then there's the spiritual aspect, which I won't even go into. So it's absolutely absurd to think that you could disconnect a small percentage of that organism and put it above all the rest of it and treat it like abhorrently, treat it like just abuse it to death forever. Like that's going to impact the whole organism. What you do to somebody else, you do to yourself.
Yeah. It's like that idea of I think it's in the Bible it says love your neighbor as you love yourself. But then you can't really apply that well in today's society because most people don't even know how to love themselves. So how can they
love
their neighbor? But that makes a lot of sense with these solar flares. We're talking about how they affect the mind, right?
Right. That's where that whole, you've got this whole subcult of people that say the human race is garbage and like they're all on board with depopulation. But it's so funny because when the whole COVID thing came out, they were the first ones that were lining up for the masks and the shots, trying to keep them dying. these same people that were the same people that have the attitude that the human race is garbage and we're horrible and we all need to die were the ones that were still are desperate to protect themselves from dying. It's so funny how that works.
Yeah. So Glenda is saying that concept of love your neighbor as you love yourself, she's saying is actually in all religions. And I would agree with that, that pretty much all religions in some aspect that I've read has that ideology in there about, you know, loving and respecting others.
Well, that's what I was talking about with the archetypes of the collective unconscious and us all being one singular organism. Over time, we've evolved these things that are like the norms, the unwritten laws, the unspoken rules. You know, we know right from wrong through all of evolution, because through trial and error, we figured out what works and what doesn't work. But we're in a weird place right now mentally because of all this stuff going on where we've decided, fuck it, we don't believe in any of that anymore. That's all nonsense. We're going to create new rules. Let's see how well that works.
And you know what's funny is, you know, obviously I've been noticing this change. I love to study history and I love to study anthropology. It's like my hardcore jam. And I can't ignore these patterns, right? There's always constant patterns that you're seeing in civilization, no matter where on the earth that you're at. But what's interesting is I've never really seen a society pattern that's quite like what we are facing right now. Like you said, this sense of self-hatred and hatred towards humanity from humans, right? That same group of people seem to have a lot of hatred towards their own bodies, right? Which is a discussion we could get into with all the gender dysphoria and the word games that go with gender dysphoria today, forcing us to accept gender dysphoria as opposed to talking deeper about, well, why don't you love your body? You know, why can't you express that part of yourself and still be in love with your physical form? Right. And they're, you know, it's almost like growing up when we were younger, boys had to act a certain way and girls had to act a certain way. And then we got into this awesome gray area where women could act however they wanted, men could act however they wanted. And now we're kind of back to this ideology that, well, if you like that, it's no longer, well, you can't like that because you're a boy. It's, oh, you like that, so you must be a girl. So we've got to change your body to match that you like that. And it's creating a whole sense of, I mean, that's self-hatred.
Yeah,
why
you're
can't
making
you
a really
like,
good point.
I'm a guy and I love to wear
like,
satin. I love to wear satin bras across my man chest and that still be manly, right?
that's,
Why do you have to be
yeah.
told that you have to get boob implants and say you're a woman now just because you like to cook for your family, you like to wear silk underwear, you like to wear your hair long? Like, who cares? That's still like a form of.
It's kind of like this thing I've noticed. I've studied feminism, just because I've had it shoved in my face for so long as a guy growing up in a society that's being run, I think, at this point by feminists. And the first wave of feminists, we're on the fourth wave now. The first wave of feminists would have found, you know, sex work absolutely abhorrent and to be insulting to women and demeaning and degrading. And now it's celebrated as the height of feminism to be a sex worker on OnlyFans.
So I have a question. When do you know what the date is from that first wave of feminism?
Well, they called it women's suffrage movement, and it was all about trying to get the vote. That much I know. I think it was.
That was what,
you know,
1901?
I think it was the late 1800s it started.
So isn't it interesting how all this stuff with feminism is almost attached to some of these solar flares when we look at that pattern from 1850 to now?
That's probably when it started. Like I said, this is a 12,000 year cycle, so it's not like it all happened in the last 20 years when we started to notice it. It's exponential. It's been ramping up, and it's just going faster and faster and faster until eventually we're just going to go back to being cavemen is what it's looking like.
I think saying that kind of puts the caveman down a little further than where he really was with intellect. Because if you think about it, the caveman still knew how to go out there and knew which plants to eat and which ones were going to kill him, knew how to make a stone tool out of, you know, make a weapon out of a stone tool, you know, round up some animals to kill them. I don't think most of the people these days even understand those basic ideologies.
I don't mean to insult the caveman. I'm just saying I think this is where we're heading. Those of us who survive what's happening right now and what's coming,
we get to be the cavemen.
We survive. Well, we survived by going into caves. I think it's always been like that.
Yeah. Well, I've always had a really strong desire to live in a cave, and I actually even posted that this morning. Like, I'm ready
Yeah,
to sell my house, and it's actually something my husband and I have been looking into, is property that have caves on the property and making sure we're getting the mineral rights to owning a cave. But what's interesting is there are a lot of spiritual texts that when they talk about, I don't want to say Armageddon necessarily, because a lot of people think Armageddon's like the end of the planet. I think it's just another part of a cycle, right? Like talking about the Mayan calendar was its end of its cycle. I think we're just, this cycle ending is maybe like a 20-year process, right? It's not just overnight. But it also talks about needing to go into the caves because of radiation. And do you think that could be a possibility if we're noticing that these solar flares are starting to get more and more intense?
Yeah. What we're talking about is radiation from the sun that the Earth's field, 99% of human history is filtering out, and we never even have to think about. But for that 1%, it becomes toxic and deadly, and we got to go into caves. I think. I think that's what's going on.
Yeah. Glenda says, I will survive. I have always thought I would survive anything. That's awesome, Glenda. We're going to have Glenda on our survival team, right?
Wait, so Glenda, are you going to be like the last thing alive at the end of time? Is that what you're telling us?
She's going to be like, I'm 20,000 years old. I am the ultimate wise woman. Bradley is saying Revelation says that they will hide in caves trying to hide from God. Okay, that's interesting. Glenda's
Jesus
like,
also said, Jesus had something, he had a couple different things to say about this time period, I think. But there's something about the last shall be first and the first shall be last. I think we're seeing that.
Oh, the opposites.
Yeah. What is good will be called evil, was evil be called good, is something like that. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't Jesus, but it's from the Bible, I'm pretty sure. But Jesus had a lot to say about the end of the age, and I think we're here.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of checks that check off, and to kind of steer away from Christianity and kind of involve some other ideologies. I've spent some time in a Taoist temple. I've been Intergate. What is the word that they use? I went through all the ceremonies, so technically I am part of the Taoist community here in Georgia, and we had to learn about the Taoist prophecies. These are things that obviously in China that they aren't allowed anymore. So the Taoist temple that I work with is actually predominantly centered in Taiwan. And they talk about how the earth has already started its transition. This is when I started going in 2011. And that's when they said we've already started the transition. Earth is going to get more intense. It talks about the red rivers in China coming, which came this year. It talks about, the bamboo blossoming right before destruction. We've been seeing that happening this year. We've seen the giant floods. So it's almost like the more we piece together different religious ideologies, the more we actually see different puzzle pieces coming together so we can see the whole puzzle. But it's so interesting how no matter where you're looking, religion or geographic location, whatever prophecies their ancestors gave, they're all being fulfilled right now. The check in every checkbox in every religion with the different details is all going off at the same time.
I think in order to appeal to the more primitive mind that came about in result of the last disaster, that what was actually science got construed as prophecy, but it's just that all of this has happened before many times. They could accurately predict it's going to happen again.
Well, it's like being able to predict what the rain's going to be in 3 days. That's technically a prophecy.
Exactly, yeah.
It's funny how many people will sit there and say, oh, you're into astrology, even though I'm actually not that. I mean, I'm interested in astrology, but I don't really talk about astrology at all. But people will see that I'm into tarot and stuff, and they're like, you're into astrology and you're into this, and all that stuff is wrong. And I'm like, it's the same as predicting the weather. Literally, it's the same as predicting the weather. And they're like, no, it's not. And I'm like, well, how is it different? How am I using a different system? Like, it's still, and they can never answer that, right? Because again,
I think this is what separates us from the elites. I think because they were the ones that came out of the last cycle on top, they have a more accurate memory of how astrology works from the last cycle, so they're better able to predict based on the stars what's coming than we are. We've got the dummied down version of astrology
Yeah.
and just what people have managed to piece together. And so they know what's coming, and then they basically prepare for it, and then sometimes in public on the media they accurately predict it, and then they look really intelligent, or that they look like they created it. They set it up to make it look like they made this thing happen. And I think they're just better at reading the stars than us.
Yeah, I think they are too. I think that they're using other systems. Like, for example, I've had a lot of students who have picked up the Golden Dawn book and start practicing magic. And I'm like, how much did you spend on that book? They're like, $25. And I'm like, I'm going to tell you right now, that's fake, because there's no one who's going to give up that type of power and knowledge for only $25. There's something that's not right there. There's something that's faulty. And I think that's part of the reason why, I mean, I do enjoy astrology, but why I haven't taken a class and why I don't immerse myself into it is because I haven't found a system that my gut says that's accurate. There's only one person on this planet that my gut registers as this is a legit person to listen to astrology with, and it's my partner, Jennifer. And she does shows on Mystic Path and with the Mystical Alternative. And I've been urging her to talk more and more about astrology, because she talks about, like she talks about right now, we're in the same energy as we were when the French Revolution and American Revolution happened. So we should be expecting that type of energy. I mean, she really knows how to talk about the energy we're in now and what point in history was it similar. And so how can we predict what type of actions people are going to take? And it's interesting because she's incredibly accurate. I wish she knew how accurate she was to get that confidence to speak out more, because I would love, she's the only person I would really want to take classes from, because my gut registers that. But then again, she talks on a language I can better understand. Same with you, Jared. Every time we've talked about astrology, the way that you use astrology is more to have a better understanding, not of who I'm going to date, but just understanding of how is that affecting humans' emotions in general. How is that, how can I look at this and how to, what to expect from other people when I'm interacting with them. And I think those are two very different mindsets in how we use astrology, right?
It's funny. When I first got into it, I got into it because I saw the correspondence between Mercury being retrograde, and when I was working as an IT professional, every time Mercury would go retrograde, the systems would go bananas, and I couldn't explain it. And I started to see the correlation. And then I moved into the phase of using it for dating, which was interesting and somewhat helpful. And now I'm in the place where I use astrology when it comes to my finances and knowing like where to invest and how and when and all that.
That's real interesting. See, and that's something people don't really talk about. And maybe that would be another fun hot topic, is to talk about astrology and just finances in general, right? Finances and what the world market is doing, finances with individual banks, but then also how you can use something like astrology and other things to protect yourself from the chaos of finances. Because we're talking about the solar flares and all of the waves and how it's creating this chaos in our mind, but that affects everything, not just the planet, not just how we talk to each other, and our relationship to money, right? I think that's another thing that we've all been taught, to have a toxic relationship to money, and that's a mantra that's said all the time. And what is more disempowering than being taught a toxic relationship to money?
Yeah, it took me almost my whole life before I even figured that out, and I'm just starting to work on it. But hey, I got to get going. It's almost been an hour. If we do have a discussion about astrology and how it relates to finances, we should bring Brandon in on that one, because he's even better at that than I am, I think.
Okay, that would be fun. I'd love to have him in on that. So thank you so much, Jared, for joining in. I'm going to read 2 more comments before I let you go. Bradley was saying, I heard that train conductors are going on strike on Monday. There's also a record heat wave coming this week. Trains move coal to power plants. Expect outages if trains stop. You know what, Bradley? That's exactly what I was saying with these news reports earlier, right, Jared? When I was saying, we were talking about how we think the government uses solar flare information as a way to do other things, to cover up other things. And I mean, right here, he's talking about the train conductors going on strike. I didn't hear anything about that. What I was reading is to expect solar flares are going to mess up trains and train schedule specifically is what I heard. So it really, I mean, that kind of corresponds with what the issue we were talking about with finding true information about solar flares, right?
Yeah, they've really muddied the waters on it.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Bradley, for bringing that up. That's a really important topic to bring up. And then Glenda is saying, like an old wise tales or lore. Yes, Glenda, because we were talking about how she's going to live to be 3,000 and she's going to be the old wise owl telling us the tales and what we call folklore now, which we all know is really ancient history for people. So thank you guys so much for joining. And thank you so much, Jared, for joining me both last week and this week. And it seems like we already got a topic for next week. So hopefully Brandon can join in. We are hoping to do these on Friday nights, but depending on everyone's schedule, it's probably going to be not always on Fridays, but that's the goal.
Yeah,
right.
That was my mistake. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you guys so much for joining, and I will catch you guys next time.